We are absolutely honored to be joined today by John Musker. John spent 40 years at Walt Disney Animation Studios, where he was an animator, storyboard artist, writer, director, and producer, along with his longtime collaborator, Ron Clements. John directed The Great Mouse Detective and wrote and directed some of Disney's most beloved and celebrated films, including The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Hercules, Treasure Planet, The Princess and the Frog, and Moana. John retired from Disney in 2018 and recently released his own hand-drawn animated musical short, I Am Hip. John, thank you so much for being here today. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. It's nice to be here. Nice to talk about music and animation, two things that are very close to my heart.
They've been so important to us as well. But there's so much to talk about with all the legendary films that you created and brought to life. But maybe to start, take us back. Tell us about how you got from windy Chicago to sunny LA and Disney.
Yeah, yeah, I am a Chicago guy. Brought, Irish Catholic family there, one of eight kids. My dad worked for the phone company for 40 years, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom. How she managed to raise eight kids with no help, I don't know, but she did. And but my mother was a creative person. She sort of sang around the house. She played the piano. She had sheet music from her youth in Chicago, Shoe Fly Pie and Apple Pan Dowdy, and then she had her recordings of Patti Page, Sentimental Journey, and all that kind of stuff. And so she loved music, and she painted a little bit. She did some things like that, all kind of sort of self-taught, and she encouraged us, I would say, in the arts. Didn't really push us into it, but if you showed an interest in that, then she was supportive of that. And my dad was too. He never went to college, blue
Mm,
collar guy,
sure.
in the Navy, World War II, in the Pacific. His ship was kamikaze. Fortunately, he survived, but
Wow.
others
Wow.
were killed. Yeah, it was like a terrible thing. But and he was a great. I had a great. Some artists. It's like, yes, I rebelled against my parents, and that's what drove me. I never. But no, I had a very happy childhood and wonderful parents, and they were supportive of the things we did. So I grew up, and I drew all through my life, and I think my mother may have pushed me into entering the John's Pizza poster contest that I won. I think as like a 10-year-old or something. I think I won like a $25 treasury bond that I think I still have in my somewhere.
It's probably worth $28
Yeah,
now.
it actually may be worth $19 now. And so we had art class in our Catholic. I went to Catholic schools for grammar school and high school. We had our teachers and whatnot. But I grew up. I discovered the Disney films very early on, obviously, and I read Diane Disney's biography of her father, and I found this book in the library, The Art of Animation, which was written by Bob Thomas, which got into how you make animated films, and it was totally entrancing to me, and I was intrigued by the possibility of someday maybe being an animator. But I was interested in other forms of cartooning too. I liked editorial cartoon. I was a big fan of Pat Oliphant, the great cartoonist. I was a fan of comic books. I was more of a Marvel guy than a DC guy, but I love Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, and
Amazing.
all that 60s Silver Age stuff. I bought X-Men and Spider-Man and Thor. I was poor, that's all I could afford, but my cousin bought all the rest, so I read everything else from his collection. And I collected a few older issues. So Mad Magazine I loved, so that was a big influence
Ah,
on me. More truckers, caricatures, and just the stories and the
Spy
writing.
versus Spy.
Spy versus Spy. Sergio Argione's the marginal thinking, where he do the little drawings in the margins, which was just great gag cartoons. Don Martin with his kind of elongated, rubbery things, and actually he was kind of a handsome guy. I've seen pictures of him recently. Anyway, Mad Magazine and the horrifying cliches. That was one of my favorite things. Paul Coker, who drew and designed a lot for, I think, Hallmark or American Greetings. And then later he wound up being the designer for the Rankin Bass specials, where he did Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and all that stuff. But he did these horrifying cliches where they'd say, stuck on the horns of a dilemma, and the dilemma would be a big yak-like thing, and someone would be impaled on it. And so I love that stuff. Anyway, so I was the cartoonist on like the school paper. So like in college, I don't know, in high school then, when I went to my Jesuit all guys high school, I became sort of a caricaturist, cartoonist on our kind of magazine style newspaper that came out, like once a month, if that, or once every couple of months. And it was great just to get the reaction of people, when I would do caricatures of all the science professors. I did the chemistry professor, and as Frankenstein being cut up by the biology professor, and the physics professor hanging out in the background. Um, all that it was kind of fun, and I also got into a little bit of community theater at the time, where I
Ah,
was doing it was sort of a church group, and I did a little performing on stage, but it was the classic like I would do posters, I would help paint the sets and all that. And it was fun for me being at that time more of an introverted kid, being having these five sisters where I never had to talk, and I was silent for much of my first 13 years. Um, but then, being part of this kind of creative group of people was something. And then even seeing plays in high school, I saw Guys and Dolls at my high school when I was a freshman, and I was just bowled over by just the storytelling and the involvement of the audience and everything. It was just really impactful for me. Then my best friend and I started making little Super 8 movies, not animated films, but we did live action films. We started even a regular 8, and then each one got more ambitious. We did like a 10-minute one that had no dialogue. Then we did like a 20-minute, heavily influenced by Take the Money and Run kind of mockumentary about a guy who wants to be a radical. Was made in 1968 or so, and
sure.
he's protesting against the CTA. That was his big thing that he was against because they did, which is the bus service in Chicago. Uh, anyway, we did that and we showed it at Loyola, and it got a really a strong response. And these weren't even relatives of mine. I was like, wow. And I had actually been influenced because I had seen a Super 8 film that a girl that I was in that theater group with, she had starred in, that somebody had made at a local guy's high school, another Catholic high school. And it was a feature-length film. And I'm like, wow, they made a movie. And this is, before video or
Sure.
phones, right? That stuff. Like you could get a camera and you could shoot this, you could cut it together, you could make a movie. So my friend Rick and I, Rick Garofalo, who I went to high school and college with, we got more ambitious yet. And so through the end of high school into my days at Northwestern, we made a live action Super 8 feature where we had friends of ours, and it took us like 3 years. It got me ready for feature animation, I guess, because it took us like 3 years to do it. In fact, we had to finally finish it because our star, who was 3 years younger than us, he was the best friend of my filmmaking partners, his brother. He was going off to U of I, so he was going to go downstate. So we got to get this done. We're losing our actor. So that forced us to finally finish the thing. And so that I learned a lot doing that in terms of just kind of telling the story visually and the mechanics of all that, and even just from a production point of view, getting work ready. And I wrote the script, but again, longhand and kind of goofily. So then, and I had been told by the Jesuits, don't use college as a vocational school. So I thought, well, I will major in English to force myself to read the great books that I would otherwise be ignorant about. But in the meantime, I was doing editorial cartooning there. But while I was at Northwestern, there were two or three big events that pushed me more in this direction. One was I went to a film festival, the Chicago International Film Festival, that was honoring Dick Williams, the great. A lot of people think of him as a British animator. He was Canadian, but he did a lot of shorts, a lot of award-winning things. He had a studio in London. He was working on sort of a feature, but he had done a version of the Christmas Carol that was done for ABC, a half-hour special, which
Sure.
Jones was the executive producer of. And I saw that at the festival, and it kind of blew me away. I thought it was amazing. He talked about his work, and he talked about animation. And I remember there was a guy standing up in the audience. Can I come to work for you? He had this little studio in Soho Square right in London. He's like, well, yeah, like we don't quite have anything going right now. But I almost felt the same way. And then like a year later, maybe 2 years later, Chuck Jones, the great Warner Brothers
I'm the
director,
greatest.
he
Yeah.
was doing kind of a college tour. He had kind of, this in the 70s now, they were starting to get their due a little bit and doing these college circuits. So he came to Northwestern. It was called an animation feast, I think, and it was sort of an animation convention or whatever. Screened a lot of different films there, and he came and spoke, and I went and heard him speak, and he impressed me at that time as someone who I think he said, and I think at that time he was like in his early-ish 60s or 65. He said, I'm my age and I feel like I still have a lot to learn. And, I've been in this field forever and I feel like I'm still learning. And me hearing that as like a 19 or 20-year-old made me think, that seems like that might be an interesting thing to get into if you can be in your 60s and not feel stale and feel like you're still growing and learning. And that seems interesting to me as I was trying to sort out what kind of drawing field do I want to get into. At the same time, the Art of Walt Disney book came out by Christopher Finch, the big coffee table book. And
Sure.
in that was the first time suddenly I'm seeing names like, so Frank Thomas, he was an animator, he animated, the dwarves in this part, crying or whatever. And Bill Titler did Night on Bald Mountain, that great big, and he did Stromboli. And
Hmm.
Ward Kimball is this great comic master who did Lucifer the Cat and the Mice and this. And so I started attaching names to things like, wow, these weren't just made by Walt Disney, but you could be an individual in a big sort of, studio and still make your mark and still do things that were individual. You weren't just totally subsumed by the whole process. And they mentioned in that book that they were developing a training program to train new animators. So bing, 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 light goes off. So I sent Disney a portfolio. They said they wanted drawings of animals and people, and I had a few drawings from one figure drawing class I took at Northwestern. And then for animals, I was in big trouble because, I'm Irish, and the Irish are the most allergic people in the world. So, I grew up never near a mammal of any sort. We had no cats, we had no dogs, and we were afraid of them on top of that practically. But so I'm like, well, I got to draw them. So this is in February. I'm trying to put together my portfolio because I'd gotten out in the mid-year because of AP credits. So I'm at the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago outside drawing the monkeys, and the monkeys are shivering and I'm shivering and like this is terrible. These drawings are bad. I don't know if they'd be better inside, but and I thought, what can I do? And I thought, wait, I had a brainwave. I went down to the Field Museum of Natural History in
Sure.
downtown Chicago. They had these amazing dioramas. I sat there in 72 degrees. I drew them, packaged them up, put them off in my portfolio, sent it away, waited a few weeks, and got the note back. You are rejected. And I'm like,
Mm.
rejected? And their one complaint they had in that rejection, and I've got the letter here somewhere, but I don't know where. They said, your animal drawings are too stiff. Stiff. They were stuffed. They couldn't have been any more stiff. I drew them as I saw them. So I'm like, that didn't work. So then I quickly scrambled. I put together a portfolio for Marvel Comics. I drew a page of Spider-Man. I drew a page of Daredevil. I drew a mystery page. Sent it off to Madison Avenue, New York, where Marvel was. Got a rejection letter back, perhaps from John Romita Sr., saying, no, you don't draw well enough.
Hmm.
Don't darken our door ever again.
Oh, jeez.
So it didn't exactly say that, but it was a rejection letter. So I'm like, ugh, 0 for 2. I started poking around in Chicago, down to some of the newspapers. Do you have any drawing work? And they were like, no, not really. And so I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. And then I got another letter from Disney saying that there's a new program just starting up, this Cal Arts, California Institute of the Arts, character animation program. This is its first year. It's starting in September. This was like in April or whatever it was where I got this letter. They said, maybe you might think about sending your portfolio there. And I read about the program. There was a little flyer I sent away. Again, there was pre-internet, so I got some kind of literature on it. And they had an animation program going there for a few years, but it was a non-narrative, sort of artier animation.
Hmm.
Jules Engel was running. But now this is going to be Disney-style, personality-driven animation taught by Disney veterans. They're people, like Ken O'Connor, who was a great layout man at Disney, and they had people they had pulled from Chenard, which was the big art school in LA that had trained so many Disney people. That school had gotten kind of, it went under sort of, and Disney kind of bought up its remnants to start Cal Arts. So
Hmm.
they took some of those teachers, some of whom were Disney veterans. Elmer Plummer, who taught us figure drawing, had worked on Fantasia and Song of the South and Dumbo and all the great movies, and he was teaching. And bottom line, I sent them my same portfolio, and I got accepted there. And so I
Amazing.
thought, well, I'll go there for a year and see how it is, because I had sworn I wouldn't go to graduate school because I was afraid I would become a permanent student and I would never face the real world. Because even my days at Northwestern, I commuted from home, so I was a fairly sheltered child. So I went to Cal Arts, and right now, this is the 50th anniversary of when we started at Cal Arts. It was just like a week ago or a couple of weeks ago was the 50-year anniversary of my first day at Cal Arts.
Did you go? Was there some kind of big party?
Well, we're doing it Saturday. We're
Okay.
doing a big Saturday. So we're doing a character animation reunion. So I'm going to be there with my fellow classmates like Brad Bird and John Lasseter, Daryl Van Sitters, and Nancy Beeman, and this whole crew. So, and many of them obviously, became legendary directors and whatnot. And I've been friends with all these years since. So anyway, so I was part of that first year class. And so the amazing thing was I learned as much from the other students as I did from the teachers. A lot of them had dabbled in animation or had done animation, even had come down to Disney and shown their animation. Brad had done that, and another guy, Jerry Reese, had done that, brilliant animator. So they would kind of give you tips and critique your stuff as well as the professors doing it. So through the course of that year, I felt like I learned a fair amount. But at the end of that year, Disney came out and they sent their review board out to look at the student work, and we didn't know what was going to happen. Suddenly they said, put your drawings up on the wall, and we're going to show your film tomorrow. The Disney review board's coming. So we're blah, 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 blah. We had no idea. And so we showed our film. Some people hadn't even finished their animation, but I had done some animated tests. I did this test of this pencil test. And it wasn't really a short. It was just a few scenes of animation. I did this kind of vampy 40s girl, looked a bit like Lauren Bacall, sort of walking into a bar and spinning around, sitting on a stool and taking a drag on a cigarette, and the bartender takes note of her, and that was it. But they really loved that test because it had personality. The drawing was decent, and so they offered me a job based on that test. They said, come into our art training program," and I had not expected that in the slightest. And it would even again, me being the homebody that I was like, wait, I'm going to suddenly move to California and leave Chicago behind. And so I got a little freaked out. And they said, well, you could just come and be an intern here during the summer for like 6 or 8 weeks, and then go back to school, and then from there, then come back in. So I thought, that would be a good way to do it. So I went to work as an intern that summer after that first year. I got to work with Eric Larson, who was in charge of the in-house training program, one of the 9 old men who had animated Peg and Lady and the Tramp, and had done
Amazing.
Figaro and Cleo and Pinocchio, and had done The Owl and Bambi. And he was the greatest mentor you can imagine, very avuncular, very kind, and would do drawings over your drawings, very simple, almost diagrams to show you how you could communicate more strongly. And so I felt like I really learned a lot from him. So I thought, yeah, I can go back to school now for a year and really apply this stuff he's given me that I hadn't really heard before. So I went back to school, tried to apply stuff. That year I wound up doing a short. I actually did like a 6-minute film, again, fairly crudely and quickly, but it was kind of a short. And then at the end of that year, the review board came out again. And so as they were going to come out, before they came out though, I called up Disney. I said, hey, remember me? I'm the guy from last summer. And they're like, who? Wait, you remember me? I was there like 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And
Intern, me.
yeah, intern me. And you said, go back to school, and then call us up. And here I am calling from the payphone at the end of the hall. And and they're like, hey, well, we didn't make you any promises. We'll see if we like your work or
Oh,
not.
jeez.
Click, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just made the biggest blunder of all time. I turned down a surefire job with Disney, and now I may do this thing. Guess what? You don't have one. So we showed the work and all that. And fortunately, they still like my stuff, and others as well. So I became part of the first sort of farm team that was extracted from college through this program. So in May of 1977, I officially started the week that Star Wars came out. And uh, it was me, Brad Bird, Jerry Reese, Doug Leffler, and actually Henry Selick who was in the Artier program. The 5 of us started at that same time in May of '77, and then I was part of it. And we had to prove ourselves even at that time.
Sure.
So we had to do tests, and they didn't like my first test that I did. I was doing a la Cal Arts a little bit, going really fast and loose, and they're like, well, it doesn't look like he even cares about animation. And then some people were saying, yeah, send him out. I think Don Bluth was willing to get rid of this guy. But Eric said, just let's slow down and let's do another test. So I did a second test where I went slower. I simplified things. I tried to put more into the animation, more into the drawing. And that went well. And Frank and Ollie even talked to me after that one. So, oh, yeah, the character in that, oh, that was great the way he did this and that. So I was
Yeah.
on cloud nine then. So I managed to make it out of the sort of trainee program and into kind of production, where then I worked on the Small and this Christmas featurette, and then was an animator on the Fox and the Hound. And I started as an animator, but then it was a tumultuous time at the studio. Don Bluth left. We weren't getting along with Don Bluth anyway because he didn't really want to hear any ideas from anybody else. And we had come from this thing at CalArts where we were very collegial and collaborative. And he was like, no, no, you have no right to give us an idea. You haven't been around here long enough. You're green. You're
Yeah.
new. The studio's always, they don't listen to the new people. You got to earn, you got to spend years here to even open your mouth. So that wasn't something we liked hearing.
Sure.
And then he wound up leaving and taking the people that were working on his sort of secret project with him. For us who were there, we said, "Good, go away. You're not really sympathetic to what we're doing." Um, but there was still a bit of a gap between the middle managers who are now directing the movies, sort of, who hadn't really directed before, and these CalArts punks, one of which I was, who wanted to, do new things. And so they felt so. There was an executive named Tom Wilhite who was trying to bridge that gap, a young guy, and he knew the CalArts people, and he was sort of a mentor and an advocate for people like Tim Burton, me, John Lasseter, where he thought we had talent, and was trying to get us in positions where we could affect things. Anyway, so he proposed to Ron Miller, the boss of the studio, that they make me a director in order to empower some of the younger people that I was in touch with, Glenn Keane, people like that
Yeah.
had been sort of held out. And so Ron Miller said, yeah, let's do it. So he'll be on the team with these other guys doing the Black Cauldron,
Sure.
except for the fact that the other directors didn't want me there and that they didn't like my ideas. And so,
Nice.
I was pitching the idea of Tim Burton doing the designs for the Black Cauldron before Tim did all this other stuff.
Before Tim was Tim. Yeah.
Tim was Tim. And they looked at his stuff. And at first, Joe Hale, who was producing it, who was somewhat open to those ideas, was agreeable. But then the other directors were like, whoa, that's too weird. That's not Disney. And ultimately, it went up to Ron Miller, who was never shown a drawing, was just described. You could do it this weird way, or you could do it a classic Disney way. Which way do you want to go? And he said, well, I want to go the classic Disney way. So basically, all of Tim's stuff was gone. And I was pretty much gone because I just felt like even my story ideas, I was storyboarding sequences and they were getting shot down and by my fellow directors and everything. I was like, I was miserable. So I was ready to quit. Every day I came into work, I'm
Ah,
going to quit. And Brad was trying to get a version of The Spirit, the Great Will Eisner comic book. He wanted to make a feature out of that up north in San Francisco. And I was going to go off and animate on that. Brad never did get that off the ground. He couldn't find money. No one would spend money on a non-Disney animated feature, and probably particularly one that was like a detective story. It wasn't,
sure.
a musical or anything like that. Or this is before the age of all these musicals. Anyway, just couldn't find any support for it. So that languished and died. And in the meantime, then they knew that some of us were unhappy on the Black Cauldron. And then Ron Clements had pitched the idea of doing Basil of Baker Street. He was a big
Yeah.
Holmes fan, as was I. And he knew that book, and he showed it to Joe Hale, the producer of the Cauldron, and he showed it to Ron Miller. And so they optioned the book. They liked the book. And so Ron and I then, so I said, okay, you direct Basil of Baker Street. You can be on this little float, the 5 or 6 people thing while everybody else is working on Black Cauldron. You can be on this oddball sort of sidebar project. So I was, and Ron was on too. Some of the malcontents from Cauldron were put on that thing. So we were happy. I mean, we liked, working on something other than that, and we had a fair amount of control. Except that, my first version was still too weird for Ron Miller. I did a version that was influenced in part by Monty Python, which I thought was very funny.
Funny.
And
Funny.
in a way, it was sort of Simpsons hadn't come out, but it had a little bit of a Simpsons mentality. It had parodies built into it of Citizen Kane and just an oddball mix of things. And Ron Miller, and we tried to go back to the books, the Doyle books, which actually ultimately the Benedict Cumberbatch series did, which is to say that our Holmes wasn't just kind of a slightly smart guy. No, he was a misanthrope of sorts, and he was manic depressive, and he didn't.
Yeah.
Uh, Dawson, who was Watson, didn't have the best interpersonal people skills and all, and he was built more along the lines of a John Cleese type, very short-tempered and short-fused. Ron Miller's like, wow, he said start over. So again, I was like, another bang, and
Yeah.
but I sort of regrouped, and there was an older mentor who helped me out, Vance Gary, a great story man, and so I was able to still get in a bunch of John Cleese sort of stuff, and the tone of it, went a little bit. It certainly didn't go in a Monty Python direction, but but we were still able to tell an interesting story and so I was writing on it and directing. So and it was fun. It was a madhouse because in the middle of that, then there was a big regime change because Ron Miller was deposed and Michael Eisner came in. He brought
Yeah.
Katzenberg with, and even though we had been working on the movie for like 3 years, it might all go out the window. They had to decide, do we still want to make this? And so they came down to a meeting. We pitched some storyboards and everything, and they did decide to put it into production, at least in part because if they didn't, there was nothing. They'd be they'd lay people off, and that didn't look good. So they're like, well, let's just roll the dice. Except you got to do it twice as fast and for half the amount of money that you said you were going to do it for. So we had to. Suddenly, it was the old Disney was a country club. So laissez-faire and blasé and no deadlines, no quotas. It seemed that way, and even when the movie got released, we were never even all that aware of when the release date might be. It felt like, yeah, we're done. Let's put it out in the theaters, as opposed to these guys who are like, okay, you got to get it done a year from now. So we have a quota every week. You got to do so much and this amount of money. And if you fall behind, you're going to get screamed at or at the very least yelled at and held accountable. And and the mantra that they had, faster, cheaper, better, they came into vogue. And but they did have better in there, which was good. It wasn't just faster and cheaper. So anyway, it was a new world that we adjusted to, and so we did Great Mouse, and critically really well received. Box office middling to low, and but
It's had a legacy though. People, I mean,
it does have a
people
legacy. I
love
mean,
that movie. People love that movie.
people love the movie, and it really is sort of the first of the new generation in a way, because Glenn Keane played a major part in the people we had storyboarding it. Matt O'Callahan, major part in it. Mark Henn, the great, who wound up animating all the great heroines of the 90s films and 80s and 90s, Ariel and Mulan and Belle and you name it. And Simba as a cub. He, all those people got a chance to really show what they could do in Basel. And so it was a great learning experience. And then we enjoyed it, and I'm proud of the film. And it is, yeah, there's many people who are of an age or whatever, and still that find it and enjoy the entertainment of it and the storytelling. Ron and I both were, we're story oriented. So some of the, in the 70s, animation became such a king, but story and production values atrophied under Wooly Reitherman, who was the director at that time, who was concerned with just making them cheaply enough and
Yeah.
just his own sensibilities. The darker stories and longer stories, or stories that were really setting things up, he was more moment to moment kind of direction. So Ron and I returned to more of that kind of storytelling. And then Michael and Jeffrey insisted on having scripts for films. Even on Basil, we didn't really have a script. We were storyboarding it with an outline and then kind of writing it on the storyboards. They're like, no,
Sure.
we're never going to put a movie into production that doesn't have a script that we approve. So they started demanding scripts, and they brought in this gong show idea they had at Paramount, where they had directors and writers come around the table, and it was a pitch meeting where you gave a very simple pitch. You got a few ideas, you'd pitch your best one, and then they would either say, yeah, and they put it into development, or they go, gong, no, we're not
Ah,
going to
jeez.
do it. And so they gong. So on that first gong show, Ron had found the Little Mermaid in a
Yeah.
collection of fairy tales, pitched that got gonged.
Huh.
Uh, Treasure what became Treasure Planet, which at that point was called Treasure Island in Space, that got gonged because that was going to be the plot of the next Star Trek movie that they'd been developing at Paramount. As it turned out, that movie was never made. If it was in the planning, a version that was really sort of Treasure Island fused with Star Trek never happened. But to their credit, Jeffrey did go back later and read Ron's two-page treatment he'd written on Little Mermaid, and he liked it. And I think Michael, who was in some ways savvier than Jeffrey at that time about what Disney was, said, well, yeah, fairy tale, that makes sense. And so let's put this into development. So then that moved into development. And then once it was in development, I wasn't actually on it. It was Ron developing it with Roy Disney at that time a little bit. And a few visual development artists were coming up with some neat stuff. They wanted to get a live action writer to write on it. They wanted to get Michael Christopher, who had done The Witches of Eastwick and Gia,
Yeah.
very dark writer,
Yeah.
and we took some meetings with him, and he was there. And then he eventually pulled out of the project. He said, my sensibility in this just I have no way of knowing how to do this sort of. So he removed himself. And so Ron came to me and he said, well, they're really struggling and all this, and I want to pitch us writing it. We wrote together on Basil. Are you interested in writing this with me? I said, sure, I would love to write it with you. So he went to Peter Schneider, who sort of ran the department for Jeffrey and Roy, and he pitched us writing it, and we were not being paid very much as it was. And so he said, okay, you guys can take a crack at it. So we then we wrote it, and fortunately they liked our version of the script. If they hadn't, I don't know what would have happened, but Jeffrey really loved the script. And in fact, they were trying to woo Howard Ashman at the same time,
I
partly
was going to ask you
because
about
of
that. Yeah.
David Geffen was involved in that, because David Geffen, the famous producer agent, was one of the producers on Little Shop of Horrors in New York, and I think helped bring it here when it played in LA at the Westwood Playhouse. That Howard directed that version out here. So he had said he was good friends with Jeffrey, and he didn't get along with Michael because I think just money wise, he would extract deals from clients that Michael didn't like. So anyway, I think David was really selling Howard to Jeffrey, saying, this is a guy you should be in business with. He knows something about animation. He's like a hot guy, Little Shop is amazing, yada, yada. So they were really actively pursuing Howard to get him into Disney. And they showed him a list of projects in development. One of them was The Little Mermaid at that point.
Yeah.
And actually, Howard had written a thing called Andersongs, which is some kind of sweet collection of songs based on Anderson fairy tales, which I to this day have never heard. And I don't know if it exists on tape anywhere, but he loved Hans Christian Andersen, and he loved musicals. And his thesis project at Indiana University, where he was in the theater school there, he had written a children's theater version of The Snow Queen, which he had written as a script. And of course, The Snow Queen became the basis of Frozen later.
Yeah.
And Howard had done children's theater growing up in Baltimore. He did children's theater there. And so anyway, so the studio just said, okay, you guys are working with Howard Ashman. And we had seen Little Shop. We love Little Shop. We had never met Howard. And and Peter Schneider, our boss, said, okay, you guys go to New York. You're going to be doing a little promotion for Basil while you're back in New York, but you're going to meet with Howard Ashman. He's got some great ideas for your movie. He wants to make the crab a Rastafarian. And in our version, the crab was a stuffy British guy named Clarence. And we're like, a Rastafarian? I'm not totally sure. How is that? It's going to be a laid back Jamaican guy and he's supposed to be this little fuss budget. Is that even going to track? And so we talked to Howard before we ever got to New York. He he said, I just want to ask you to start with though, are you thinking, Little Mermaid is set in Denmark? Is it in like kind of fairy tale Denmark? And we said, well, it's kind of a pastiche fairy tale thing, and it isn't really tied to any historical period in Denmark. He said, because I've got some ideas of music. I'd like to use reggae and calypso music in this because it fits with a seaside motif. In my mind, it fits with sort of the ocean. And it's a way of kind of contemporizing the music a little bit and getting the music closer to something, you might hear on the radio or something. And we said, we're down and we're good with that. I think it wasn't maybe until we got to New York that we probed him a little bit more on the crap because we had not written the script yet. We went to New York. We had written like a 10-page treatment and he saw that. And I think maybe before we went there, we got a little bit more from him. So he said, we asked about the crab and he said, well, no, I'm picturing he is a diva and he's very much a fuss budget, but I'm picturing he's like Jeffrey Holder was the Uncola man who is
Of course, from
the
Seven
actor,
Up.
and they're
Yeah.
very grand, and he's come down to the islands and bigger than this little crab, but being bigger and grander and theatrical. I'm like, oh, okay, okay. So when we wrote the script, we pictured Jeffrey Holder, the Uncola man, as the crab.
Outstanding.
And then we went there with this treatment we had written, and Howard. We met with Howard in his apartment in Soho, and we saw. Did we see it that time? No, we did. He was working on Smile at that time with um, um, Marvin Hamlish. And in fact, Marvin Hamlish was originally going to do the music with Howard for Little Mermaid.
How interesting.
And then he and Howard had a falling out. That Smile turned out to be very rough going. I think that bumpy previews. I think they didn't agree on the fixes for it. Howard was miserable. The play came out and it didn't last very long. It got bad reviews, mixed to bad reviews, and it closed. And it was devastating for Howard, kind of. And then at somewhere in that point, he said to us, what would you think instead of Marvin if I worked on this with Alan Menken? We said, great, we loved the Little Shop. And so Alan came into the fold. So when we came out that first time in June of '86, we talked about the treatment and he talked about, how the songs, there could be a song like this. I think we had a serenade in the lagoon. He said, well, yeah, I think that could be musicalized. And let's say it's called something like Kiss the Girl,
Mhm.
and he had, well, there, and then we thought the mermaid would sing a song, kind of an over the rainbow song. And he said, yeah. And I think our song generally, or originally just talked about her love of all this. No, what was it? It was a bit of a love song in a way or something in its generic way. And Howard said to us, no, no, I can't, I don't write love songs that aren't anchored in something. It has to, the best writing is specific rather than general.
Hmm.
And so, I don't write June Moon Spoon lyrics. I write lyrics that tie into it. So it's better if the song can deal with her love of the human world and the specificity of all of that and her objects and that. And that's the point of the song, not some wistful over the rainbowy kind of thing, but a more tangible thing.
Yeah.
And we said, good, go for it. So when we came back in December, by then I think we had written our script. Having heard some of the input from Howard, for example, he thought The Witch, when even in the treatment form, he says, "Oh, I love this because you've got this rivalry here, and it reminds me of Dynasty." So I think
Huh.
The Witch is like there's a Joan Collins element to the Witch that I like. So when I was writing The Witch, I pictured Joan Collins sort of saying the lines, and Ron said, "Well, I always thought of B. Arthur," and I'm like, "Well, B. Arthur," but I thought of Joan Collins. He thought of B. Arthur. So somewhere in the mix, it turned out they were both very sort of sardonic and a little bit campy. So so that's what we wrote. So we wrote the script, and while Howard was continuing to work on Smile, by the time we got there, also the Little Shop, he had been doing rewrites on Little Shop because the movie had been previewed. I don't think he got along all that well with Frank Oz. I think
Ah,
they did
interesting.
the movie originally, didn't work very well. They had to redo the whole ending. They reshot it.
They,
And
they they changed it. The ending's different than what
yeah,
way different. Yeah.
yeah, they changed the ending radically. Howard was involved. They wrote the new song for the end of the movie, and it came out and it got fair reviews. It did okay, I think, but I think Howard again was frustrated because he didn't have control. And so on Mermaid, one of the things that Peter Schneider did for Howard was he said, "You're going to be a producer on this movie, but he made me a producer too, so that we couldn't get outvoted by Howard. So I was sort of on an equal footing with Howard. So,
Uh,
which was good from our point of view, just in that creative thing. But generally, we were in pretty close creative harmony with Howard as we were making the movie. You know, if we had an objection, I mean, he would fought his ideas very strongly, and I offered some suggestions that he thought was stupid, and he kind of told me they were stupid or just like, what? No, I don't want to do that. But there were a few that he took. I mean, he when he did Part of Your World, the original version of Mermaid, the reprise of Part of Your World, where she sings where she saved the prince, was a very totally positive, uh, up almost happy thing, you know. Oh no, I'm sorry, it was the other way. I'm sorry, we're on the other way. It was down. It was miserable. She was you know she was lost. She couldn't do anything. And we said, well, no, this mermaid, she's so positive and so upbeat. We think actually that reprise should have a positive aspect to it. And he said, okay, so that I don't know when, I don't know, but something starting watching, you'll see someday I'll be part of that world. That was his rewrite.
and then the wave crash.
Right, in the
Yeah.
wave crash. And in the original, she said, "I'll never be part of that world."
Oh,
That was the
interesting.
original lyric. And then there was another thing where in the grotto he had written lyrics that were very beautiful and poetic, but he talked about all the things there that were in the grotto, and he was talking about fine china and leather and gold and all this stuff. And we said, well, the trick is in our story, she learns about all these things from Scuttle, the seagull, who's an idiot and he doesn't know what anything is. So that's what. So he rewrote all those lyrics to have thingamabobs and doohickeys and all that, or what you want to call it, or whatever, because he not to use any of the real words for these objects
Sure.
came from the rewrite. So that was something with Howard. The other tiny one that I got with Howard with when they wrote the first version of Fathoms Below, and I'm Larry David in my private life. I give these notes sometimes, and they're not couched in politically or just phrased well. But I said to them, or to Alan and Howard, the first version they did of Fathoms Below was very kind of up and lively and all this. And I said, well, I think this should feel like it's more like a work song, like these people are really at work, and it's a little darker. And I said, closer in tone to the Roustabout song in Dumbo,
Yeah.
where they're putting up this tent, and it's a darker, maybe more of a minor key. Right now, it sounds a little bit like an Old Spice commercial. But they took the note. They took the note, and Howard joked about it later. So I think he kind of agreed with it. So Alan put it into a minor key, and I don't think the lyrics changed all that much. Well, there were different things, but basically the minor key thing and the darker thing. So it was more of a work song, and I think it did work better with that. So
From a broader standpoint, right? You were doing Mermaid, coming out of Basel, coming out of an area of a time of Disney where musics were
yeah,
less out of fashion.
right,
So now you're moving more towards this Broadway type
right,
of thing.
yeah.
Were you nervous about that? Was Eisner nervous about it?
I don't think, well, Eisner was more disconnected with it. I think he liked the idea of working with Howard. And I don't think they knew the Disney canon well enough to even realize that this was that different than what had
Mm.
preceded. But it was, and we knew it. But the, but we were fans of musicals. So Ron and I both love musicals, even though we're not gay, we love musicals. And we, uh, we, so like in Basil Becker's, it was Ron's idea, I think, to do for Radigan to have a song, and to really put a song in there. And the template for that in some ways was the Captain Hook song in Peter Pan,
Totally.
and Jules Stein and Comden Green wrote, and Captain Hook, the sort of lightweight, the almost kind of tarantella, the very campy, which had the recitative part in the middle, where he's like, oh, they make the baby play hook, Sir Richard, very campy. That is where the canker gnaws, and all this. And so we had our recitative part in the middle of the song with Radigan, where he's like, oh, yes, and they've called me a rat, whatever it was that he said there. But no, I'm going to do this. And then finished with the big thing a la Cyril Richard in Peter Pan. So we were sympathetic to show tunes, I would say. And it wasn't really until, I'd say, years later when they did the score for Beauty and the Beast, when Ron and I heard that. And we weren't, for a while, the studio wanted us to do Beauty and the Beast possibly because had a different director and they weren't agreeing with what he was doing. And they tried
Huh.
to figure at us, and we were too exhausted from having done Mermaid. But Ron and I both had a concern when we heard Beauty and the Beast that we thought that went another step in terms of theatricality, in
Yeah.
terms of stylization of the theater. Can you accept that in the film? This is no longer an animated film with songs. This really, really is a musical, and it really
A
is,
million percent.
and is using all those, tropes and things. And so we were more concerned, but we were proven wrong. Our concerns were unfounded as it turned out, and in fact, it was, nominated for Best Picture, and audiences love it. And it's perennial favorite. It's a wonderful, fantastic movie, and the music is absolutely central to it. And it wouldn't be the same. I mean, we saw it as being a musical, but we didn't picture that level of theatricality with the whole opening number of Belle, where they've got the chorus of villagers singing against them and the counterpoints and all that, and,
Yeah.
and duets and things. It just took it to another level that Ron and I just looked at each other like, I don't know, can that work? Ours was closer, at least in some ways, to Pinocchio or Snow White, or as far as songs, but they told the story that were driven by characters, but less ensemble pieces and that kind of thing.
But then so you follow up, right? Because then you do Aladdin, which is kind
We
of the
did do
next
Aladdin,
iteration, and so it takes everything to a different. Well, of course, with Robin Williams takes everything to a different level.
right?
But
Yeah.
talk about that.
Well, that was an interesting case too, because our version of Aladdin, we saw Aladdin very early. Well, and actually, Howard Ashman was the one who had pitched Aladdin. We were stepping into his project. He had written like a 40-page treatment of Aladdin. He had written 5 songs with Alan. It was very campy. It was based on kind of a Hope Crosby road picture. I mean, it was like Road to Baghdad, and it was very da da ya da, and kind of breaking the fourth wall like Bob Hope did in those movies and all that. There was no genie. There was no Robin Williams. The genie was black in that version. He was sort of a fat swallower. Cab Calloway,
Sure.
like me, had been written, and it was written a la, fat swallower, and Cab Calloway. Um, by the time we got to Aladdin, they had tried to develop a script out of Howard's treatment, and Jeffrey didn't like it at all. Jeffrey wasn't very clear, I think, on what he wanted, but I think he had seen Thief of Baghdad, maybe, the great Korda movie, and I think he just had some idea for what the Arabian Nights thing would be, and it wasn't what Howard was doing, and so they went further and further away from his thing. So when we got done with Mermaid, and we entertained a few other ideas before finally them showing us Mermaids or Aladdin, saying, "Here's this," and there's a few other ideas. They showed us Lion King too. We said, "Who's going to see a movie with lions?" And so we said no to that. And then, but Aladdin we liked, and we liked the songs and all. But we had ideas for changing it too to make it work a little better in animation. We kind of turned some of the human characters into animals, and uh, in Howard's version, the princess was sort of a Jewish American princess who was
Oh,
very interested in money and fingernails and daddy buying everything for her. She wasn't a sympathetic character. And the sympathetic character that Aladdin got involved in was sort of, I can't remember her name in West Side Story, but she was like the tomboy in West Side Story
interesting.
that is sort of the go-between. So there was like a tomboy character in Howard's treatment that Aladdin winds falling in love with. But Ron and I just felt like, well, no, falling in love with this beautiful and inaccessible princess for this poor street guy, that seems like something we could relate to, a girl that's out of our reach. I mean,
Of
like
course.
every girl in mankind, so we went more that direction, and we didn't want her to be unsympathetic. But the name Jasmine came from Howard's treatment, but not her personality or any of that stuff. And the tomboy character went away, and so there really was this courtship of Aladdin and Jasmine. So anyway, we we kind of resuscitated Howard. So we said we like things in Howard's. We want to go back to that, but we're going to add other things. And they said, well, go ahead. And we wrote a script, a treatment, and a script based on that. Jeffrey had some concerns about it, but um, ironically, then that's when he was running afoul of Michael Eisner, and he wound up leaving, and so well, no, he didn't leave until after. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. He was there. No, he was there during. I've got the wrong movie for a second. I'm thinking of Hercules, not Led. So anyway, we had suggested to him the idea of doing Robin Williams. Actually, ironically, Howard knew Robin because his roommate when he went to Bennington College or something was Valerie whoever, who became Robin Williams' first wife. So he had this
Oh, get out of here.
relationship with Robin. And so when we suggested, when we got onto Aladdin, and we knew that there was a concern from Roy Disney, like you can't have an African American genie, like an enslaved African
Mm,
American, like that is, it was maybe woke ahead of its time in its own way,
I get that.
but he was like, that's problematic. Also, the movie was set in Baghdad. He's like, and the Gulf War was just starting to get rolling. So he's like, we are not setting a movie in Baghdad. Howard's was set in Baghdad. So I made up Agrabah. I took the letters from Baghdad and did like an anagram and just fooled around with different combinations. And Agrabah, that sounds kind of
That
vaguely
is amazing.
amazing. You're Arabic. And then with the genie, there had been a movie that was done for the parks that Jerry Reese, my friend from Cal Arts, great director, had done called Back to Neverland, which was sort of in one of the pavilions, and it had Robin Williams and Walter Cronkite, and it was a movie designed to explain the animation process. So
I
they had,
totally remember that.
yeah, so they had
100%
Robin
remember
Williams
that.
going on a tour of stage, and he gets sucked into the animation.
Absolutely.
He becomes sort of a lost boy. Suddenly he's like, "Whoa, what am I doing here?" You know, all that. And but Jerry did stuff a la Duck Amuck, the Chuck Jones thing, in that suddenly, there'd be an erasure, and Robin would grow big and grow small, and and be tormented. And so we liked all that, and we thought, wouldn't Robin make a great genie? Because you could do all those mercurial things that you can't even really do in live action. We could do Robin that nobody's seen before, except the people who've seen Back to Neverland. But this will be in this feature context, a major character, a real storyline, still trying to get genuine emotional involvement with the character, and yet letting him being Robin. Can we walk that line? Can we, it was you could fall off one way or the other. Anyway, so we pitched to Jeffrey doing Robin. We took a comedy album of Robins. We recruited Eric Goldberg, who had his own studio in London. He was an American, but he had a commercial studio there. But he was it was very stressful trying to keep a studio open in those days, your own commercial house. So the idea of coming to Disney and getting to animate a character like the genie Robin Williams, he was like, sign me up. And so he
Greatest thing, right? Yeah.
he came to LA, and we said, and we couldn't, we had to go outside because all the other animators were breaking their necks trying to get Beauty and the Beast done. So they said, you got to find somebody. And so Eric is this one guy who's this brilliant, brilliant animator, does never worked for Disney, but he may be available. Can we do it? One of the development executives, Charlie Fink, told us, yeah, Eric's looking for something. And we said, well, we got something. So we got Eric, and we had a sort of a skeleton team, and we started going on it. And Howard, we had to pitch Howard the idea of Robin. At first he was a little, because he had his, set idea. And we said, well, this Cab Calloway thing could be one of the personas that Robin does. Robin does different things, but within it can be that. And he said, okay, I get it. He was kind of grudging, but he got it. But at the same time, Howard was sick by that point. We learned about it. We didn't learn about, he had contracted it while he was doing Mermaid. We never learned of it until we were getting ready to do Aladdin, and we were going to go out to New York to meet with him. And he said, before you come out, you should know, I've been ill.
Mm.
And I was like, well, I'm talking to him on the phone, from California. I was like, oh, how ill? He said, pretty ill. And he said, talk to Nancy, my assistant. She'll give you the details. Talk to her. I said, oh, Howard, I'm sorry, but there's strides being made, and there's treatments. So yeah, just talk to Nancy. So we talked to her, and she said, yeah, he's been diagnosed with this thing. He's suffering. He's in, not he's declining, but he's still can think and write and do all that stuff. So we flew there. We were glad we'd heard this because he was just looking at him. He was kind of gaunt, and he wasn't himself, and just getting into a car. We went out to lunch with him, and just sort of easing into the back seat of a car was like a struggle for him.
Tragic.
But so we resurrected some of the songs he had written before, but there were a few new songs that we needed because of the change in the storyline. So one of them was this idea of a Prince Ali number, and so Howard, that was one of the last songs he wrote. He wrote that, and that might have been the last song he wrote, and just did a great, hilarious job on that. That didn't exist in the old Aladdin. So he wrote that with Alan, I think, on a keyboard at a bedside next to Howard, and all that. So while we were doing Aladdin, then Howard died that March of '90, the year and a half before it was going to come out. And, we had met with him a few times, and, he was doing stuff on Beauty and the Beast where they were flying to him and all that, and they never told everybody why. And he's wearing suspenders because, his pants don't fit anymore and all that. Anyway, he continued to decline, and, I talked to him on the phone, and it would just be a whisper. He could barely talk. And then we had notes from Jeffrey that we were trying to relay to Howard. We had the screen. We said, well, Jeffrey thinks like this, and I don't know if you could do this and that. And he's like, doesn't he know I've been sick? And I was like, sorry, Howard. Yes. He knows you've been sick. So anyway, it was all just a matter of a few weeks after that he died. And we're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And so we interviewed various people, but they had, Tim Rice had worked with Elton on Lion King by that point, and they suggested Tim Rice to us. And I think Tim met Alan, and then Tim met us, and he seemed very congenial and smart and everything. And so we said, yeah, let's use Tim. And then so Tim and Alan, then after that, Howard had never gotten around to, there was going to be a Magic Carpet song. Howard had described it in his original thing, not his original thing, but once we had our thing, he talked about it being a Begin number, Begin, which has that button, sort of, like Begin to Begin. And I think he felt like that was a 30s, because all of his music and his thing was sort of 30s based, kind of, Cole Porter or whatever. It was a 30s conceit. And so he felt like a Begin was within that 30s motif. But then by the time they were gonna write it, Howard was long gone. That Begin idea sort of went out the window, and then they wound up writing a duet which had Jasmine singing, and Jasmine didn't sing before that. So our actress Linda Larkin, we had cast, and she didn't sing. So we're like,
Uh,
oh, what do we do? So then we found Lea Salonga, who by
it was amazing.
appeared on Miss Saigon and sounded enough like Linda that it seemed like it could cross over. And as it was, Scott Weinger, who did Aladdin, didn't sing either, and so we got Brad Kane, who ironically was a roommate of Sam Levine, a story guy from New York, who went to school with him at NYU, I think, back in the day. And he was singing in bands, and he was did some stage work and whatnot. We really liked his voice, so we flew to New York and recorded Brad and Leia. I think that was recorded, or did they come out here? I can't remember now. But they recorded it together, and so, but we were concerned. But there was a preview of Beauty and the Beast did their work in progress screening at the Museum of Modern Art. It was
Yep.
a tremendous hit, and it's like it was showing black and white footage and get a peek behind the curtain. Humongous hit for the New York Film Festival, and very hip suddenly. This is Disney animation, but it was like, here's Martin Scorsese seeing it and liking it or whatever. It was like that kind of thing. And then, but we know we're doing this something that's not like Beauty and the Beast. We're working on Aladdin that's got this whole different tone. It's a comedy first and foremost, and it breaks the fourth wall, and it treads a fine line with sincerity and will you still get invested in the character? You're supposed to, will you? We weren't totally sure. So anyway, we were like, we might be walking into something. Fortunately, Robin was so amazing, and the stuff that Eric did, and the story people, and Richard Vanderwyn, our production designer, and Jeffrey's notes. He had good notes on that were painful, but we got some better things as a result of his painful notes. All of that sort of coalesced and came together such that when the movie came out and it played, it was a different distribution system back then where movies stayed in theaters longer if they were successful. That one wound up staying in theaters for like a year, in reduced circumstances. But yeah, it did.
I remember seeing it in college,
Yeah,
and yeah, it was in the theaters for forever because
yeah,
I saw it twice. People
yeah,
saw it twice. The,
yeah.
the school would actually buy it and actually play it, so it was just everyone loved it.
Yeah, I
And
know. It was, and that was the thing with Mermaid too. When we had a preview of Mermaid before it came out, just at the local AMC theater, they had a family preview and it went very, very well. It was great numbers. But then they said, well, what if we do an all-adult preview just to see what we get? They thought it was
yeah,
a little bit far-fetched. They did it, and the numbers were even higher than the family one. And I just remember Jeffrey walking out kind of glassy-eyed, like, how do I market this now? This I want to get wring every dollar I can out of this. So they developed this two-prong ad campaign, which they've used in most of the movies, where they try and get family audiences, but try and get dating audiences and adults. But they did that partly by trying to disguise that it was animation to help remove the stigma. So like when they did the ad campaign, when they were doing the original poster for Little Mermaid, they had fun, 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 whatever, and all the characters all over the place. And we were like, Jeffrey, I drew up an alternate version where I just had the mermaid on a rock. I'm like, can't we do something like this it's more fairy tale like and elemental? He's like, no, 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 you stay out of this. You're not a marketing guy. So he sent me away, and then while we were doing the mix on Mermaid, Nancy Parent, Howard's assistant, who was working in publicity at that point, said, "Look at this! This is the new poster for the adult campaign for Mermaid." She shows us, and it's a silhouette of a mermaid on a rock, and silhouetted in part because they're trying to hide that it's animation, but it was very much closer to the one that I drew.
of
And
course it
I was
was.
like, hooray! So, but it turned out, yes, dates would go to see Little Mermaid. It wasn't. It started to break down. There had been a stigma created over years that animation was just for kids,
Of course.
and even little kids at that. And bit by bit, things helped break that down. Even American Tales helped break that down a little bit. Roger Rabbit then helped break that down,
Totally.
and Oliver to a certain extent. And then Mermaid really busted it down. And then Rescuers Down came out, didn't fare that well. But then Beauty and the Beast came out, bang. Lion King, bang. They did that great ad campaign where they did Circle of Life, and they put that out in theaters, 6 months before the movie came out. And it was so great as a standalone piece. It got everybody jazzed about seeing the movie before it came out. Brilliant marketing. And so that stigma went away. Now, as years have rolled on, now it's resurfaced in various ways where some movies haven't worked as well for an adult audience, or even, like there's this one right now, obviously. Gabby's Dollhouse. I don't think it was ever
Oh,
maybe for an
I,
adult audience, but
I can't say I've seen it.
I have not seen it. And I saw the trailer and I was like, I so do not want to see that. It reminded me of the 10-year-old kid when I saw What did I see? No, I saw
Barbie,
Oh,
Oppenheimer.
Barbie, no, what it was, I was seeing Barbie.
Yeah.
They ran a trailer during Barbie for Willy Wonka.
Oh
There
yeah,
was a
yeah.
10-year-old kid in the audience, and I liked Willy Wonka, but the Chalamet version, but there was a 10-year-old boy in the audience. I still remember he was down there. When the trailer came up and they had the Oompa Loompas and all this, he's like, I am not going to see that movie. He was so adamant. I was like,
Very
whoa.
definitive.
He was totally different. That was like the kid when we had our preview of Little Mermaid. It was funny. There was a kid sitting next to me when we had our preview where it was unfinished and things were in black and white. And so we're showing it. We're on pins and needles. How's this preview going to go? And the shot goes by with story sketches sort of the dolphins swimming in the water and the seagulls going by black and white. And this little 6-year-old next to me said, "What the hell is that?" I was like, "Oh, we're in trouble. It's the first scene of the movie. We lost this kid. How do we get him back?" But he after it got in color, I think he was okay. So
Yeah, I
uh,
think that, looking through it, the common things that I see are, yeah, I do think that the music bonds people to the characters. The songs bond people to the characters. The characters are already so fleshed out, and
yeah,
there's all these
no, but the
complex.
music is essential. It's essential to
It
and
is, but also
the emotion of the story, obviously.
it is, but you've also breathed life into these characters, like you said, with Aladdin and Jasmine. You have to have the right chemistry. You have to have the
Right,
right tension, and I
right.
think that and the music bring it all together. And that was, I think, what carries everything through. And one more thing about Aladdin, I've noticed. You kind of mentioned it when it was very, to me, Bugs Bunny, Chuck Jones, in the fact that you can go with a kid and be an adult, and the parents will laugh maybe more than the
Right,
kids will because of all
right,
the clever little
right.
inside jokes. William F. Buckley Jr. Who knows William F. Buckley
I
Jr.
know.
except
Yeah, I know. Even our post-production supervisor, we showed, we're working on the movie. She's like, "Who's that funny hunchback guy?" We're like, "Ed Sullivan. You don't know Ed Sullivan?" And she didn't know Ed Sullivan. But yeah, William Buckley. It's like, but our argument always, and then we got flack inside from people like that. You guys, you're doing the wrong thing. You're doing
Nope.
the bad thing. Um, was that as a kid, I watched the Warner Brothers cartoons on TV. I saw it on TV in Chicago and Garfield Goose, a children's show in the morning, and uh, and they had them. They'd license all these things, so they'd show these things with caricatures of Humphrey Bogart and Greta Garbo. I didn't know who Humphrey Bogart was, and I didn't know who Greta Garbo was, but I knew from watching those. Well, there's a guy with a long face who never breaks a smile, and he does this. And there's a woman who they always show with big feet, and she's always very, this. And they were funny to me, even though I didn't really get the references. And so that was our thinking, for good or bad, was that if they're funny on their own right, somehow, even if you don't get the references, it's okay. And then you get this multi-tiered thing where you can have slapstick that kids will laugh at and that is more easily gettable, a visual humor, and then there's stuff that is definitely over their heads, and both audiences can watch it and come away feeling like they really got something out of it, and the kids aren't lost and the adults aren't bored, basically. So, and it
It's always
wasn't that calculated. We were really making a movie for ourselves when we were doing it. And having grown up on, I grew up on Disney, but I grew up on Warner's too, as did Ron. So, and Eric Goldberg had a lot to bring the Warner sensibility into it. But for us, it was just like, what is entertainment? And can you walk a line? Can you, and I also, we wanted to, in all these movies, make movies that reflected our sensibilities. We watched Saturday Night Live. I watched
totally.
Monty Python. I loved the Marx Brothers movies, but I didn't want Mermaid or Aladdin to be like, this is a movie that was in the vault somewhere, and it was made in 1942, and we pull out. So yes, it's a fairy tale, and yes, it's sort of meant to sit on the shelf with those, but it's meant to reflect the sensibilities of the people who make it. If you look even at Pinocchio, there's stuff with Jiminy Cricket trucking, yeah, doing stuff that is,
Yeah.
hipster stuff, and or the Crows, totally hipster
Oh,
in
totally.
Dumbo. I mean, they were black musicians, they were talking jazz musicians, sort of. So it wasn't totally new to Disney to do that, but it hadn't been done in a long time to have kind of things that were of the moment in a Disney feature. And we
Yeah.
thought if we threaded this needle where we didn't compromise the sincerity where we wanted it, that an audience could bend a little bit and do that. And so that was, and because it reflected our own taste, because we could be a judge and we didn't have to, let's do this now, let's test it out on people, and okay, 27% left,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
13% left. No, it's like, do we think it's funny? Do we think it's moving? Do we think it's exciting? And if it passes those various tests, and we had internal screenings, we would show it to the staff and we would get notes, and they were good notes, and they were sometimes, ideas we hadn't thought of, many times ideas we hadn't thought of, and other times things were pointed out a problem but didn't have a solution to. They were all helpful. It wasn't like the movie sprang out of our heads. No, it was very much a collaborative effort of story people and writers and Howard and Alan and the animators and Jeffrey and it was a lot of people coming at it from different angles.
And it was interesting, as I look at your career, you kind of both historically interesting and successful in the fact that you were able to work within various eras of Disney,
Yeah,
like the post-Walt era, then the
right.
Renaissance and such the kind of wayside, and that was where Treasure Planet comes in. And then you kind of come in on what's called the revival with Moana, and with Princess and the Frog, and music comes center stage again.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
have you been able to navigate through all the? Were you cognizant of these trends, or it's just one of those things where, again, you're seeking inside what you think is the right story for people?
I think we really were still. I don't think we thought we have to change with the times, other than, John Lasseter twisted our arms to make Moana CG. I was campaigning for making a hybrid film, and we had a big international, and I thought the decision hadn't quite been made. Well, let us do a few tests now. And we had a big meeting with international marketing people, and I want to announce John's next film, and it's going to be their first CG film. It is? Well, I guess it is. And in hindsight, I was fine with it. I mean, I think we were able to do things with CG that it would have been impossible to do in hand-drawn animation. And there was even a legitimacy because when I got to the islands, we asked one of our advisors, or we said, is there a graphic tradition of some painter or artist who we could look at their work as a basis for what we're going to do to try and incorporate that? And he said, there is no graphic tradition on the islands. I'm like, no. He said, no, it's a sculptural tradition. It's sculptural.
Mm.
And I realized looking around, even looking at the people's faces and their bodies, they're so sculpted, those cheekbones and the chins and the feet and the hands and strong bone structure and Samoa in every place. And and the landscape itself felt like it was sort of carved. So in my own mind, and then the ocean we could bring to life in a way in CG that just we couldn't have done in 2D. So and all the textures and fabrics of clothes, all that. But in terms of the general movement, regimes changed, and we didn't try to bend to the new regimes. We still generally tried to make movies that we liked, and we hoped to talk our bosses into going with them. And we didn't uh, think, oh, the taste of the audience has changed, this and that. I mean, we did get on Moana. We didn't write that script, and we had, Taika Waititi wrote the first draft, and then other writers came in, and we certainly had some very strong voices. Our producer, who was a woman, and Pam Ribbon, who was a writer, and so the people were beating us up in some cases about don't don't let our lead character Moana take backstage to Maui. Keep her up in the front, And I had some things where I wanted to do things that would have pushed Maui more to the front.
Mm.
I kept getting hit over the head. No, no, no. See, it doesn't. And in hindsight, I'm glad that they did that. It was right that the ending used to involve Maui in a way that they actually used somewhat in the second one. But we reworked it so she really was her agency that accomplished the goal at the end, and that made it more her story, and it was a better arc, and it was just a better story, and she works better as a character. So all that was to the good. So we made those kind of adjustments, and it was a different system too with John Lasseter because it was a he brought in this Pixar system of story trust where you're taking a movie and ripping it apart after you screened it internally, and
Mm.
having a meeting with fellow directors and story people and really sort of shredding the movie and then reassembling it. And that was difficult because even ironically, in the days of Jeffrey, uh, he would do a certain amount of that, but we didn't have a meeting of 20 people doing that. And so on Princess and the Frog, I feel like it wasn't quite that way, and we were in sync with John. On Moana, that was a greater struggle because there were more ideas that were coming up in that sort of story trust meeting that were really taking our movie a whole different direction. And so that was a challenge to try and navigate that. But and then just doing a CG movie rather than a 2D movie, learning about that pipeline. Um, but no, I just ironically, yeah, in some ways you can divide the studio into almost 10-year periods. It seems like where there's the 10-year Walt period, then there's the 10-year Jeffrey Michael period, then there's the 10-year Lasseter period, and now there's this post Lasseter period. I don't know. It does sort of divide up, and I do think they do reflect. It isn't an accident that uh, like Princess and the Frog and Moana came back musically. I think John liked music. They never did a musical at Pixar, and I think he liked the opportunity to do it. And I think some of the people that are like Andrew Stanton, I think he was suspicious of musicals to a certain extent, where he didn't like Beauty and the Beast, or the villagers singing
Huh.
about it. He did that sort of stylization, and I think he felt that it was too remote, too phony, too stagey, too Broadway, and so Pixar never really did musicals. But John did like them, and I think, and we still continue to like them. So the idea of most of the features of Treasure Planet was the only one really that we said, if there's a song, there may be a song in it, but we really saw it as like an action adventure movie, and we didn't think action adventure and a musical could comfortably live in the same feature.
Sure.
But and I still, and I still am a fan. I mean, I don't think every movie has to be a musical, and I love, The Incredibles and Ratatouille and Toy Story and you name it. I mean, a lot of Up and things like that. But I still do love the way music can work with animation, and I think it has a special appeal, and that particularly where you can make the visuals reflect the song in a way that you almost can't, or they used to a little bit in live action, but you're really trying to fuse them into one thing. An emotion it becomes visual, and notes become character points almost. It's a real hybrid.
Well, to your point, it's interesting because Pixar, I think, did a lot of their emotion through scores with Michael Giacchino, with
They
Up,
did, yeah,
right, with
beautiful
Ratatouille.
scores, yeah, right, and
But
Randy Newman, and yeah,
for sure, but speaking of Randy Newman, right? So one thing I also noticed, and it's not just me, but with Princess and the Frog, Moana, with that return to music, it almost as if, and you tell me, it almost seemed like it wasn't just musical; it was authentic musical. You hired Randy Newman, who had a background in New Orleans. You
right,
hired, Tavaka and Lin-Manuel
yeah,
Miranda, who understand that it's the Polynesian type of musical culture.
yeah. That was something new, I would say, yeah, and that when we were doing Princess and the Frog, we were looking, we pictured it being a musical, and it's New Orleans and that thing. We didn't realize at first that Randy had that connection. Actually, it was Tom McDougall, our music VP, who sent us a whole collection of Randy, and he'd written a song about Louisiana, and we read up about Randy and learned, his uncle or whatever had taught at Tulane or something. They'd spent summers down in New Orleans, and he kind of soaked up things there. So the idea, because we really wanted it to be an American fairy tale, so the idea of doing someone who wrote Americana and yet had this New Orleans connection, that seemed valuable to us. And even, then getting people like Terrence Blanchard to lead the choir on that, and uh, I can't remember the name of the guy who did the Zydeco stuff, but he was a real deal from there. Dr. John doing the opening song, that was
Oh,
my
so
idea.
great,
Yeah,
so great.
originally we were gonna have Randy do that song, and Randy was a character in the movie. He was going to be this otter character, and he was going to be like Jiminy Cricket, tell the story to us sitting at a kind of a weird piano there. Let me tell you the story. And Randy was absolutely petrified about having to act. He was just beside. He's like, I don't really have to do that. Well, it's just a few lines, Randy. It's not bad. And he would kind of joke about it, but he was petrified. And then as the thing evolved, I think we realized Dr. John is so iconic, and I love Dr. John. And I think he's a great writer for animation. I wish somebody had done a character with Dr. John's voice for it. But so I pitched, well, what if we have, Dr. John do this sort of Valentine in New Orleans? And Randy was like, yeah, yeah, that's good. And he had performed with Dr. John in various venues
Amazing.
and concerts and all that. So, Dr. John was getting a little frailer by that point, but we recorded down in New Orleans, and he had his cane with all his feathers and his juju and mojo and all that. And our recording production manager, Kristen Collada, her birthday was while we were down there. So she got Randy Newman and Dr. John, she didn't get them, but we got them to sing her happy birthday in the studio while we were recording.
Holy cow.
What a fun thing that was for her.
Oh
But
my
anyway, yeah, we
goodness.
went to Jazz Fest. We got soaked up. Neither Ron nor I had been to New Orleans even. So we wanted to, John, but that was Lassiter really. John was like, you got to soak up the culture. You got to go down. You got to spend some time. And that's what he did on Moana as well. When we pitched the idea, it was sort of based on Maui, and I had initiated it. I had read about Maui, and I thought it was an amazing thing. And I had, uh, loved the paintings of, Gauguin and that sort of thing. And I had the novels of Conrad and Melville that are set in the South Seas just seemed so exotic and very vivid to me. And it's a great landscape for a movie. And so that led me to think, well, is there some kind of mythology that goes with that area? And then I discovered there's this huge, rich vein of mythology, particularly the character of Maui. So we pitched a Maui-centric story to John and Ed, and they liked it, but he said, you got to go there. And so our development department, which did an amazing job at setting up this sort of 3-week trip where Ron and I and a few other people, James Finch and Jessica Julius and Karen Tinkoff went down to the islands. We went to Samoa, Fiji, Wahine, and uh, and we learned a lot down there. We learned that was where we really learned that navigation was so important to them, and they took such pride in that. So we then came back, and that became a central element of the story. It wasn't in there at all in the other version, and it also shifted from being Maui story to being Moana story. And it was Ron's idea to name her Moana after this word we had heard down there, which meant ocean. And I was like, yeah, yeah, that sounds good. I like that. So it was so some of that change of the authenticity really, in many ways, you can lay at John Lasseter's story a little bit that he felt that research can enrich the story, that it doesn't have to get in the way of the story, but it can give you things and deepen the story that it might not otherwise. And he was right. I think that we once we got down there, we heard about all these things. Then we really felt, we had never gone to Denmark, and it wasn't really our goal. We didn't even on Aladdin. It was sort of a campy version of an Arabian Nights story. It wasn't like any sort of historical document of that area of the world and anything they'd gone through. But on this one, on these two both, we felt like no, there's something about the culture that we really got to do right by the culture, and it'll be to our advantage to just draw on this great resource of cultural richness. And so we intended on Moana to make a movie that the people from that area would be proud of and would feel good about. And I think we did. We've shown it to people down there, and they've translated it into. It's the first movie ever that was partly based on a promise that John made that yes, we will translate this movie into Tahitian. No movie had ever been translated into Tahitian before. We had a big Tahitian premiere. They use it now in schools to help kids who are losing their Tahitian. It's losing to
I
English
love
and
that.
French, and then the Maori, who had been the most suspicious group at the beginning, maybe, and they were like, well, let's do it. We want to do a Maori version, so they did a Maori translation. And then the Hawaiians said, well, why don't we have a Hawaiian translation? So they did a Hawaiian translation as well. So
That's how you know. That's how you know you struck the right chord.
yeah, that
Yeah.
was it basically. And then
Yeah.
even now I bump into people. I buying my ticket to go to Tahiti with my wife this fall, and or this early this spring, and the girl I recognized just the way she looked. And I said, "Are you from Samoa?" She said, "Yeah." And I talked about, "Oh yeah," and she loved the movie. And when we went overseas to New Zealand. I was at a hotel, and one of the guys was Tahitian who worked in the thing, and he loved the movie, and it was just great to get that feedback of people from the culture who really felt like it said something about their culture in a way that they were proud of, and then yet it's a story, it's entertaining, it's not a historical document, it's a fictional thing, but that celebrates a real living culture. That's what we're trying to do.
It is wonderful. And listen, I've taken entirely too much of your time. But before I let you go, one thing I wanted to ask, because you showed at the PNW Mouse Meet, is your last project you done recently,
I'm
which is
hip,
I'm
yeah.
Hip. Yeah, talk for just a couple of minutes about I'm Hip because it was such a delight to watch.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, in my return from Disney, my principal goal was to try and do my own short. I really had grown up, at CalArts. We did kind of little animation. I started as an animator. I wanted to see if I could do my own short, but I had different ideas, but all of them were music driven. We talk about music. I had, a half dozen ideas. All of them were based on one song or another. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to animate to a song, and I had different songs in mind. And I spoke about this with my wife a little bit. I said, I've got these different options, and she said, well, do something funny. And and I thought that was good advice. And I'm hip. I'd heard that song 30 years ago. Dave Frischberg and Bob Dorough wrote this very funny song, Dave Frischberg lyrics, and it's a parody of hipness. It's a sort of a delusional narrator who thinks he's the hippest guy around,
Oh, funny.
and it's just so breezy and light and jokey, and it won't cure any diseases whatsoever. But I thought so. I listened to it again, having heard of it and done little dibs and dabs over the last 30 years. Like, if I ever did it, I might do a little this and that. So I sat down more seriously at that point. Okay, I'm going to listen to the song again. Do I still like it? Do I still think it's funny? Do I think I could work on this for 2 years? It's going to take me to make this or whatever, and still like it. And I played the song, and I said, yeah, I still like it. So I got the rights to the song. I storyboarded the whole thing. I decided early on that the narrator should be not a human, but a cat. Cats seem cooler to me than dogs, and kind of breezy and fit with Dave's persona that he sings with. And uh, and then I lined up some great collaborators, some people I worked with at Disney, some that I hadn't, some that worked at Disney but had just worked on other projects. And and I found a great girl, Talene Tanelian, who was my right-hand production person who knew After Effects and knew Adobe Premiere and new TV Paint, the program I was doing. So anyway, so I just kind of worked my way through it over the course of, I animated all in this room, right where I'm sitting here, right on this little machine here. And I drew it all on my Cintiq, my pressure sensitive tablet. I didn't do it on paper, but I was animating by hand. I was just using a stylus on a
Sure.
pressure sensitive screen. And I did it, and then I had a big premiere. I finished it, and I entered it. I heard from the late, oh, it's so sad, Fumi, who died of cancer, whatever,
Mm.
8 months ago. She was a publicist, worked for Howard Green, and then went to work for DreamWorks and other studios. But she said, well, to enter Annecy, the big animation festival, it doesn't have to be finished. You can enter a work in progress. And I thought, oh, that gave me a little bit more of a margin for getting it done in time. Annecy is always like in early June. So I sent them my unfinished version. And this is the premier animation festival. It used to be every 2 years. Now it's every year. Annecy, France, little town near the Swiss border. They have films. They have feature films from all over the world. They have shorts. They have conferences. It's a week-long thing. It's like the biggest thing of animation. So I sent it there, and I got accepted there. And they had like over 3,000 entries, and I was thrilled. Of course, now then I entered some other festivals, and I didn't get it. And I was, well, how did I get? I don't know how I got in there, but okay. So I went to Annecy and I showed it. It was a big thrill. It did not win anything, but it was fun to see it with a live audience. And then I started showing it. Won a few awards at a few festivals. I attended a few festivals, and I did a circuit of showing it at various studios around in Portugal and in Ireland and England and here in the U.S. I showed it at NYU and the School of Visual Arts, and it's been a great ride just showing it. I have a little presentation, as you saw, kind of on the making of it,
Yeah.
and I had a lot of fun. So now I'm working on another couple of
I
them.
was going to ask you. So I was going to ask you. So doing another one, huh?
I am doing another one. I actually have two that I'm cooking up, but one of them I'm having a little trouble getting the rights to the music. Neither one is quite like I'm hip, except they're hand drawn. They're
Yeah.
both music driven. They're both driven by songs, but both of these pieces are instrumental pieces. So the story can be very far ranging because there's no lyric I have to tie to.
Sure.
So, but I storyboarded both of these. I like them, and I'm starting in on animation on one of them now, and I don't know how long it's going to take. Probably too long, but I really enjoyed that whole process from beginning to end, kind of, even though I had to fit it in with other things, and I don't give myself deadlines, which is one reason why it took so long last time. This time I'm going to maybe try and get a little more focused to have it happen a little bit quicker. But so yeah, I'm doing that once again. I just want
Awesome.
to. My line that I say, which is true, and it could come back at any point, which is as long as I can see and I can think and I can draw, and maybe the fourth one could be, and I have the energy. Um, I intend to do this, but any of those could go horribly wrong. I could, not be able to see well enough. I've got arthritis that could get so bad I can't do that. My mother had some issues with her thinking in her later life, so we'll see if that maintains. And my energy, who knows? So, but in the meantime, I'm pressing ahead. I'm hoping
Just keep doing it.
I'm just going to keep doing it. It really is fun for me. And in the meantime, I'm also trying to pull together a book of my caricatures. I'm a caricaturist, and I've got literally a few thousand I've done over the years. So I'm doing this kind of slightly disguised memoir, but collection of caricatures that I'm intending to self-publish and somehow thread pulling it together. I have a brother who's an art director for magazines, and he's helping me kind of lay this thing out and stuff. So I'm hoping to sometime in the next couple of years get that out, and I'll just be selling it myself. It'll be a very narrow audience, but
Not as narrow as you think.
oh, I don't know, but it's a fun thing. Looking back, it is really a trip down the memory lane, like this kind of stuff where oh yeah, the issues with Jeffrey on this one, and oh yeah, and this, ooh, and oh, but this great animator did this and that. Anyway, a lot of my caricatures, they're not just drawings of people, but they're kind of topical gags and that sort of thing. So they have little stories. So I'm intending to write little bits of text that helps set up the jokes, and then the left-handedly give you sort of a different sort of perspective on life at the studio and in my own creative world and whatever over the course of the last 40 years. So
It's amazing. So, how can we keep an eye out for the shorts? How keep an eye out for the book? Do you have any socials or anything you
no,
maintain that we can?
you can't keep any eye out for anything. I'm not going to be promoting them until they're close to being done. Once any one of those gets done, I'll start putting word out there. I think with the book and maybe the short this time. I didn't do it last time, but I may create a website, so that
Oh, great.
it can be directed to that. I still haven't put I'm Hip online. I sort of have it's traveling around right now as part of an anthology that Ron Diamond did called the 23rd Show of Shows that plays at art houses and
Sure.
at college campuses around the country. That'll be playing there for a while longer. At some point when that plays out a little bit more, perhaps I'll put it online. But it's a weird thing. I don't know. I just feel like once it gets online, everybody has it. So I feel,
Protective.
a little bit, yeah, a little
I
protective
get
of it. It's out in the world. But I know other animators who made these shorts and done it, and they've gotten millions of views now, and it's been satisfying. So maybe I'll do that. But and I certainly, it was meant to be seen by an audience. I wasn't just, I'm doing it just for me. No one has to see it except for me. No, I'm shameless. I'm a showman. I like to show things and hear people either laugh or boo or walk out or whatever. So that's the
Well,
way I feel, yeah.
I, for one, will keep an eye out, and if I hear anything, I'll make sure my audience knows, and I'll
Okay, great.
post it. I'll make sure you're top of
Okay,
mind
I
at all
will. I
times,
will use you shamelessly in the promotion of whatever I
as you
find,
should.
if assuming I can bring at least one of these things to fruition, which I hope I can.
I am here. You are always welcome back for anything you want to talk about. Open invitation, golden ticket, John.
Okay, all right. Thank you, John.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. It was an unbelievable conversation. I'm just so appreciative of it, and I can't wait to meet you again soon.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jonathan. Good,
Thanks
good
so much.
podcast. Okay, all right. Bye bye.